Welcome back. You're still watching SA Today. Now, reports from Zimbabwe are saying that former President Robert Mugabe will be laid to rest at his home village in Kutama, Zvimba, this weekend. The Zimbabwean government yesterday confirmed that former President Mugabe will no longer be buried at the National Heroes Acre Memorial in the capital Harare, as previously announced. Mugabe died in Singapore earlier this month, and since then there's been a constant shift in where and how he would be buried, with the Mugabe family constantly clashing with government authorities. The family claims that in his final days, Mugabe expressly stated that he wished to be buried at his rural home. But that was seen as a rebuke to President Emmerson Mnangagwa's administration. It had tried to protect Mugabe's legacy as a liberation icon by wanting him to be buried with other struggle stalwarts at Heroes Acre. So just how significant is it that the late former president will not be buried at the National Heroes Acre in Harare? To explore this for us, I'm now joined from our Pretoria studios by Professor Everisto Benyera. Thanks so much indeed for joining us, Prof. Welcome to the program. Always a pleasure to talk to you. Just how significant is it that someone who is regarded as one of the fathers of the new Zimbabwe, the free Zimbabwe, is not going to be buried at the National Heroes Acre?
The viewers. Again, this incident demonstrates the complexity of Robert Mugabe in life and in death. The National Heroes Acre in Harare is the symbol of the nation's fight for self-independence, and it is where national heroes are supposed to be buried. Robert Mugabe himself presided over many burials, and for him not to be buried there is actually an incident that makes many question whether this is the fall of the Heroes Acre itself.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about what surrounds his burial. We've got to be reminded that he was considered a chief in his local area, and so maybe this might trump the idea that he has to be buried at the National Heroes Acre. Maybe that as a chief, he needs to be buried near his people. Could that be an explanation?
Let's remind ourselves how we got here, Peter. For over 40 years, Mugabe was at the forefront of Zimbabwean politics, and Emmerson Mnangagwa was one of the trusted lieutenants. And the removal of Robert Mugabe from office, especially by Emmerson Mnangagwa, is something that would have hurt the former president very well. And the former president, Robert Mugabe, must have, as an intelligent man, that he was weighed his options and say, how do I have the last say in this contestation? And the view that he be buried in the rural area and not in an urban area, he be buried as a traditional chief and not an ex-president, shows the complexity of the man and also the complexity of Zimbabwean politics. The decision to make this announcement when President Emmerson Mnangagwa is at the United Nations General Assembly must also not be taken lightly. I see here President Mugabe continuing to be very influential even in death, and that he is now considering to be being buried as a chief and not an ex-president just shows the level of anger and bitterness that he accrued since he was removed from office by the political party that he helped shape.
Are you suggesting then that before the coup of 2017, as many have described it, that up until that point, it was a foregone conclusion that he would have been buried at the National Heroes Acre? Might he have been as far back as then, considering being buried at home?
I wouldn't want to go with the latter explanation because Robert Mugabe is a leader who held the National Heroes Acre in high esteem. His first wife, Sally Mugabe, is buried there, and he presided over many burials. He took many dignitaries to the National Heroes Acre. This shows how he treated that site in high esteem. And for him to rebuke it at the last minute is a sign of his anger. Had Robert Mugabe not been removed from office, especially the way that he was removed, I don't think he was going to take this option to decide to be buried next to his mother and not next to his first wife.
All right, and then perhaps finally, what now of Heroes Acre? Does this, I suppose, does it devalue the National Heroes Acre, and does it set a precedent that in the future other families might say, we don't want to be buried there either?
Is this the end of the Heroes Acre, and is the Heroes Acre just becoming another cemetery, just like the one at Mbare, just like the one at Warren Park, or the one at the so-called Mbudzi? Remember, Robert Mugabe is not the first one to refuse to be buried there. Dumiso Dabengwa is not there. Oliver Mtukudzi is not there. Professor Phineas Makurane is not there. So for me, the politicization of the Heroes Acre was a problem which at one point was going to come to haunt ZANU-PF. And what a way for it to come back when it is now coming in the form of the former president, the one that was expected to occupy the prime grave, not being present at the Heroes Acre himself. For me, Peter, this is indeed the demise of the National Heroes Acre.
All right, so Professor Benyera, thanks so much indeed for joining us and giving us your insights on this significant development which has taken place. That was Professor Everisto Benyera speaking to us from our studios in Pretoria.